Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. So, another game against Drew's Bretonnians. Last time, if you remember, a few videos ago, we did just a simple 1,000 point game, and it was quite a quick dwarf victory. I went for the Ironbreakers and the Longbeards and the two Gyrocopters, and was able to smash through the Bretonnian lines pretty quick. This time around, I've changed up the list, going for a slightly different strategy now. Got some similar units, so got the Runesmith General just on a Rune of Stone and a Rune of Spellbreaking, the Thane VSB with the Master Rune of Grugny, 30 Dwarf Warriors with Hand, Weapon and Shield. Haven't brought out the Sword and Board Warriors for a little while, so good to have them back on the tabletop. 20 Longbeards with Great Weapons, 20 Slayers, or shall I say 18 Slayers with 2 Giant Slayers, no Banner or Musician though. One Gyrocopter, just the one Gyrocopter this time, a cannon, and 3 bolt throwers. Been a bit hit and miss, pardon the pun, with the bolt throwers. They sometimes do the business, other times they don't really get their points worth. I prefer to just have 3 of them rather than have 1 of them with a bunch of runes or 2 of them with a bunch of runes. Because I think just the more dice you're rolling, the more chance you are of hitting. And once they hit, they're pretty good. It's just hitting that's the problem. So let's see how we get on with the bolt throwers this time. Here's the tabletop then, after deployment. We threw down some terrain. We've got a nice snowy board with some evergreen trees. And you can see the Bretonnian deployment, just to sort of give you a flavour of it, as you can see it on the far edge there. Looks a bit sparse from here. You know, you're not seeing a big phalanx of knights charging up the middle of the table. You've got some knight buses on the corners there, one behind the building that you can't see properly. I'll show you in a minute, and just some small squads of archers in the middle of the board. So where are these knights, these cowardly knights? Where are we going to fight them? The Bretonnian forces from left to right then. So you've got 6 Grail knights on the left flank, or their right flank on the left of the picture. You've then got a hero on a Pegasus, paladin on a Pegasus, with a few cheeky items, can't remember off the top of my head. Onto the right of the picture you can see, 9 Knights Errant. Those Knights Errant sort of hiding behind the building there at an angle. You can then see 2 units of 12 Peasant Bowmen behind their defensive stakes. And on the other side of the table, you've got the main unit of Knights of the Realm with the level 4 Prophetess on the Law of Life, 2 Paladins, or was it a Lord and a Paladin? No, it was 2 Paladins, one of them being the BSB, and then you've got 5 Mounted Yeomen on the right hand side there. And the Dwarf deployment then, you can see I'm pretty much just stacked in the middle of the board there with 2 of my bolt throwers. The cannon, you might not be able to see it properly in this picture, it's just behind the unit of Dwarf Warriors. Dwarf Warriors slightly ahead of the Longbeards and Slayers, because obviously that's my sort of anvil unit, which hopefully should survive a charge of knights, whereas the Great Weapon Longbeards and Great Weapon Slayers I want to use for countercharging. You might be able to see them on the base of my Gyrocopter there in the bottom right hand corner of the frame. Which is just tucked in behind a little bit of terrain, but just on the line, ready to buzz forward. And the only other thing left is 1 bolt thrower, which was on my left flank, and that's the picture of the bolt thrower there by itself on the left flank. The Bretonnians took the knee to pray to the lady, while the mounted yeomen were vanguarding forward on the Bretonnian left flank. On Dwarf turn 1 then, I turned my Gyrocopter and pivoted it to fly directly across my lines to my right flank, because I wanted to sort of engage those mounted yeomen, because they were on a course to come around the side of the woods and onto the flank of my cannon. So I thought I could just dispatch my Gyrocopter across there to deal with those mounted yeomen and hopefully have my cannon firing for as long as possible. The rest of the movement phase I didn't really do anything, just kept the dwarves still, and tried to unleash some shooting on this paladin on a Pegasus, and the bastard survived. So he caught a cannonball in his teeth. He swatted away a bolt thrower shot. Basically, just kept passing his ward saves because I threw a lot at him, and he still survived. So after a fairly uneventful Dwarf turn 1, the Bretonnians started their advance. As you can see, the Knights of the Realm unit marching full speed into the centre of the board there. You've got the mounted yeoman on the right-hand side of the frame coming in. So just the presence of my Gyrocopter, I think, made them change their mind about going around the side of the woods towards the cannon, and they decided to come in to support those Knights of the Realm. The archers stood firm in the middle of the table there to make some long-range shots against my lines. The Knights Errant advancing forward then, sort of out of their hiding place into the middle of the board, and the Grail Knights on the far-hand side, along with the guy on the Pegasus, also doing the same thing, just marching up. And that's a shot of the other flank there, and as you can see, the Grail Knights close to coming into that bolt thrower, which obviously they're free to do, but I was actually a bit surprised that they bothered to go after that bolt thrower, because I put that bolt thrower on the flank thinking, well, they're not really going to send over some knights just to kill one bolt thrower, are they? But I suppose after you've seen through that bolt thrower, you can then come round the back of my line, so go for it, why not? So this is actually a picture of Dwarf turn 2. I'm trying to remember what magic was cast. I can actually see Throne of Vines going off. I think I let Throne of Vines go, because you can see the card in the picture there by the Knights of the Realm unit. Did I use my dice, or did I use my Dispel shot? I can't quite remember, but I managed to dispel, I think it was the Dwellers Below aimed at my Dwarf Warriors, so I managed to come out of Bretonnian turn 2 quite unscathed so far. And Dwarf turn 2 kicked off. So as you can see, I've moved up my Slayers just to meet those Knights Errant. I thought, well, they're probably going to charge into something next turn anyway. They've got a fairly decent chance of getting into one of my units. I just thought, well, just bring it on. Just come into my Slayers. I'll make it easy for you. You know, you're thinking about choosing a target. Well, here I'm going to present one target for you that you can't resist charging. So let's see how those Knights of the Errant do against those Slayers. The Gyrocopter was able to do a cheeky bombing run over the mounted yeoman, and I rolled a big 10 on the artillery dice and wiped them out with one shot, which was fantastic for me. I mean, dispatching that Gyrocopter to get rid of the fast cavalry, and this Gyrocopter has form actually, because the last few games it's managed to do precisely that, be it Dark Riders or mounted yeomen, or in the past it's done a unit of, what are they called? Slanesh fast cavalry. I can't remember what they're called now. And wipe out a unit of fast cavalry with a bombing run by rolling an 8 or a 10 on the dice, and getting a very successful shooting or movement phase rather. So that was fun. And then my Gyrocopters just sort of settled down there by the Knights of the Realm. Let's see if they can pass a march test next time around. In the shooting phase, then I managed to get a bolt thrower shot to hit the Knights Errant unit. And pierced through the ranks, failing one ward save after another. 3 of the Knights Errant were destroyed with one bolt thrower shot. Fantastic result for me, because I was a little bit apprehensive about getting that Knight unit into the face of the Dwarf Slayers, but now with only 6 of them remaining, I think they'll crash into that Dwarf Slayer unit and find out that it's just an immovable object, and I should be able to grind out that combat if they do decide to go into the Slayers, of course. But being Knights Errant, they'll have to pass the leadership test to do otherwise. My other bolt thrower over here on this flank also managed to hit the Pegasus, but this guy's just invincible. I mean, he just glances off these bolts and just swats away cannonballs. And even though I managed to take a wound or 2 off him, he was still alive, and obviously within charging range of the rest of my lines now. Meanwhile, the crew of that bolt thrower were looking at those Grail Knights thinking, well, today is a good day to die. And that's how things stood at the end of Dwarf turn 2. Bretonnian turn 2 then. The Knights of the Realm did a bit of a curious manoeuvre here, because one of the Paladins left the unit and sort of pivoted around. I think he was thinking that I was going to do some sort of manoeuvring behind his lines with the Gyrocopter there in order to perhaps go after the archers or charge the rear of the knights or something. So that paladin was sort of standing by the woods there, just watching as the other knights advanced forward. And in came the knights errant as expected, crashing into the dwarf slayers unit there before any casualties were taken. And a blurry photograph of the Grail knights hitting the bolt thrower. The paladin on the Pegasus also attempted to charge, but he attempted to go into the Longbeards and unfortunately didn't roll enough and failed his charge, leaving him sort of out in the open there. The dwarf slayers took a few casualties from the knights errant, but then just swung back and would just slaughtered a bunch of them, and breaking them and causing them to flee. You can just see the champion fleeing away in the middle of the picture. I've had a lot of good games with Slayers. I really like them. They always tend to be, it's like one of those units that everybody knows the rules for, but then they always tend to surprise people because I guess a lot of people don't take Slayers because they're not the best units that Dwarf can take, but I really like them. The fact they're unbreakable is invaluable. You always tend to roll more dice than your opponent expects. They're expecting you to pick up 10 dice, and you're like, oh, by the way, I've got 2 champions instead of 1. That's a couple dice there. And oh, you killed 4 slayers. That's another 4 attacks from the death blows. And all of a sudden, you're picking up a fistful of dice and slaughtering them, which is always fun. The Grail Knights, as you can see, went through the bolt thrower and reformed, ready to come into my lines here. And that hero on the Pegasus now looking very exposed, with obviously the Knights Errant breaking on their turn. The Slayers were able to pivot towards that hero on 1 wound left and just licking their lips. And that's how things looked at the end of Bretonnian turn 2. As you can see, the Knights of the Realm unit with his characters in it getting quite close to the lines there. And I can't remember whether that was just a simple mistake on his part, because obviously it gives the option for the Dwarf Warriors to get a charge in. You're within short range of the bolt throwers now. Or perhaps he just wanted to get into combat quickly because he thought he could deal with the Warriors and not take another round of shooting. Oh, actually, wait, no. Yeah, so the reason I think was to get within range of some magic. Perhaps the short range for the dwellers below, I think it's 12 inches. I have to double check that. But anyway, you've got the Knights of the Realm unit looking sort of dangerously close to the dwarf lines there. So, action about to happen in turn 3. Dwarf turn 3 then, which in this photograph looks almost identical to the last photograph. Spot the difference, huh? Well, the Paladin on the Pegasus is gone. The last Knights Errant that was fleeing has gone because he took a bolt thrower in the back. What else has changed? Yeah, we did some shooting at that Knights Errant unit, and everything kind of bounced off it really. The cannonball, I think, stuck in the ground just in front of the Knights Errant unit, which was Knights of the Night Realm, sorry, which was a bit frustrating because I was hoping to bounce a cannonball through them. The bolt throwers missed. I've moved up my Longbeards, as you can see, into the middle of the picture there in order to sort of get a flank charge on that Knights of the Realm if possible. I moved my gyrocopter in front of that Knights of the Realm unit. It's actually flat on, square on with it, so I'm not trying to redirect it off to the side. I'm actually thinking, well, I want those Knights of the Realm to go into those Dwarf Warriors. I don't want those Knights of the Realm to go into the War Machine, one of the War Machines, and then go and then overrun sort of and pop out sort of behind my lines. I don't want them to go into the Longbeards either. I want them to go into those Dwarf Warriors because they're going to bounce off those Dwarf Warriors, and then I'll be able to go into the flank with the Longbeards. So I've just pushed my gyrocopter. It's just hovering right in front of that Knights of the Realm unit. So if he does want to charge, then fine, charge. But then you've either got to overrun into those Dwarf Warriors, or you've got to just reform and wait to see what we do on our turn, whether we shoot you or whether we charge you. So, yeah, what would I do if I was a Bretonnian player in that point? I've got a bit of a decision to make. And on Bretonnian turn 3, the Knights of the Realm do indeed go straight into the front of the gyrocopter, and the crewman is thinking, well, bring it on. And then, of course, the inevitable happens, and the Knights of the Realm choose to overrun into the Dwarf Warriors. Not sure if that was the right choice, actually, because obviously it's the Dwarf turn next, and that combat isn't going to happen until those Longbeards are in your flank. It might have been a better idea just to reform and then force me to charge you in the front where you've got the quite narrow frontage. But, you know, everything happens in the speed of the game. I guess Drew might have been thinking, well, if I don't go in, then perhaps he won't charge at all, and I'm just going to take another cannonball and another bolt thrower. So it is what it is. And that's how things looked at the end of turn 3. I believe the Grail Knights failed their charge on the Slayers, which I guess I would have done the same thing anyway, because why not? You're going to make it next turn anyway. The little legs of the Slayers are unlikely to be able to charge you anyway. And as you can see, the Bretonnian force is very much divided, with the units of knights on either side and the dwarves still sort of holding strong in the middle. And the middle of the board there is very much empty. You've still got those archers at the back of the board, but the action happening at the dwarf board edge. You can also see on the right hand side of the picture, one of the paladin who was by himself has come round now behind the cannon, so the cannon doesn't have long to live if it can't take out that paladin next turn. Dwarf turn 4, then the Longbeards with my general and BSB in the unit charged the flank of the Knights of the Realm. The initial charge of the Knights of the Realm was pretty destructive on my Dwarf Warriors, took a couple of ranks off the unit, but obviously having all of those great weapons in the flank was pretty devastating as well, and several of the Knights of the Realms lost their lives. They did manage to hold, even despite... in fact, actually, I think they won combat, because they killed a lot of the Dwarf Warriors. I think he had the War Banner in there, he had his BSB in there, so they had quite a lot of combat res, and managed to win combat, but we were steadfast and we stuck. The cannon pivoted to face the lone paladin threatening behind our lines, and I got lucky because basically I needed to roll a 2 or a 4 on the artillery dice, otherwise the cannonball would overshoot, and I rolled a 4, and so cannonball to the face, bye paladin, big d6 wounds. With the standoff continuing on the other flank, what remained of the Slayers failed their charge and just got ready to take that Grail Knight charge next turn. So I don't have a picture of it, but in Bretonnian turn 4, a lot of the more of the knights lost their lives, and it was just the paladin BSB remaining, or just the 2 paladins remaining, I can't remember now, that broke and fled off to the right hand side, away from my Longbeards unit, and the Longbeards pursued them. The Dwarf Warriors, as you can see in the picture there, turned to face the incoming Grail Knights, if they can get through those Slayers. So they obviously charged those Slayers, killed quite a few of them. The Slayers have struck back, killed a couple of the Grail Knights, and the combat is just raging on there. And then in turn 5, it's again neither side. Obviously the Slayers are unbreakable, but the Grail Knights not winning combat again, but not managing to kill all of the Slayers. So that combat was just grinding on. And then meanwhile, on the other side, the Longbeard had pursued the Paladin BSB off the board, and we were able to get the points for that unit as well. So it finished quite a strong win for the Dwarves. I think we decided to call it a bit early because we were running out of time. But there was just a few Grail Knights left, locked into combat with those Slayers, so it was only a matter of time before they perhaps broke through the Slayers, or the Slayers killed them. But then obviously I had my big units left in the middle of the board there. So, how can we do a debrief? What went wrong for the Bretonnians? I think my strategy worked quite well. Apart from one bolt thrower, actually my 3 war machines in the middle there survived. And my sort of castle in the middle of the board worked quite well. I was able to direct the knights into my Dwarf Warriors, and into my Slayers, of course, as long as they weren't charging into my Longbeard unit that had my characters in it. The Slayers are quite expendable, and the Dwarf Warriors unit can take some damage on the charge, so I think my tactics worked quite well. The bolt throwers came through for me, killing quite a few of the knights errant, and eventually getting some wounds off the Pegasus guy. What else? Yeah, so for the Bretonnians, I think the deployment could have been a bit of an issue for them. They were very much on the flanks and quite spread out, which can work, I suppose, if you can take on the dwarf units 1-to-1. 1-on-1. But if if I've got war machines and I'm going to take off a rank or two from your units before you get to me, you might find you need to gang up on my units in order to win those combats, or just having more chaff so that you can make sure that you get a 1-on-1 combat rather than a 2-on-1. And also the magic phase. I think the prophetess was on the law of life, which can be really good in certain situations. Obviously, I'm speaking from someone who's never actually used the law of life. Being a dwarf player, I'm just on the receiving end of it, but I've played against it quite a few times, and I think it can be very good. Let's say you're running elves and you want to make use of earthblood, flesh to stone, and you're really buffing up your units. Whereas for Bretonnians, you've got ward saves, you've got high armor saves. It's not that beneficial to you. And of course, the way to beat dwarves in the magic phase is to just have multiple threats, right? Where I'm having to make a big decision each magic phase. Do I throw my dice at this spell? Do I hold back and throw my dice at the next spell? And you're able to get more spells off. Whereas Throne of Vines is a fantastic spell, but dwarves can throw dice at that in their magic phase, and I'm really sort of saving my dice for dwellers. And if I'm having to do that every turn, just save my dice for dwellers, I'm not having to make a big decision. I've got a spell scroll. Perhaps you won't get it off one turn because it's a high cast value, and then the magic phase is nothing really for me to worry about. So that might be something to think about. Yeah. Anyway, enough of my rambling. Leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel. Why not? Speak to you soon. Bye.